Just make sure we're being recorded.
Oh, yeah.
Perfect. There we go. Um, Welcome to MIT Mondays, our first one for the spring semester. I'm Denzil Streete, Senior Associate Dean and Director of Graduate Education here at MIT. And MIT Mondays is our way of demystifying what it takes to be a graduate student at MIT and getting into graduate school generally, right? I think it's a win if you were to get into any PhD program these days. So we hope the information you hear through our conversation today with our fantastic student Juana is going to really help you as you think about what's next on your journey. Some logistics, if you have questions, if you can place those questions in the Q&A function on your dashboard, and we'll get to them throughout the conversation. We'll also leave time at the end to answer specific questions. And this event is meant to be conversational, so I'll be intentionally leaving a lot of open-ended questions for Juana to fill in. And I don't know where the conversation is going to go, but we'll embark on it hopefully to help you navigate questions you may be having or questions you didn't even know you would have through this conversation. And we're coming here from snowy Boston today, so it's quite chilly. So thank you, Juana, for joining me today. Maybe let's just start off with a brief introduction. Tell us about who you are, where you started off, the research you're doing. Just give us a quick introduction.
Yeah. So I'm super excited to be here. I'm going to preemptively apologize because sometimes I talk kind of fast. So also, if I go too fast, somebody stop me in the Q&A because this has been a known problem. I'm okay. Maybe I'll start here. My parents are both immigrants from Mexico. I'm the youngest of two daughters. So my sister gets the award for first person in our family to go to college. I get the award for first person in our family to think a PhD was a good idea. And we both grew up in Chicago, and I stayed there for pretty much my entire life, plus or minus some vacations back to Mexico, um, up until and through college. So I went to the University of Chicago for my undergrad. I was there for 4 years, and then in 2019, I came to Boston to start my PhD program in the Department of Biology here. Um, I think that whole sort of set of adventures was really different from what I was used to. So I'm used to like living home with my parents. Suddenly I moved to a different city. 2019 was also a suspicious year because 2020 starts right afterwards, and suddenly we're in a pandemic. And that also changed the way I did graduate school substantially. So it impacted which lab I ended up joining, the type of research I ended up doing, what my priorities were. And so now I work with Adam Martin in the Department of Biology. I do sort of developmental biophysics. So how do your organs get physically into the right shape? So the sort of blending of biology and physics together. I am not a physicist. I was like, I'm going to be a biochemist when I grew up. I am not a biochemist right now. That could change. Um, and I'm also sort of a near terminal PhD now. So I am graduating this spring. I have scheduled a defense. So we sort of have the full perspective of like what does a PhD look like? Yeah. So I think that's sort of like a general encapsulation of where I come from. I'm happy to. I want to really emphasize this. I'm a really easy person to talk to because you can ask me pretty much any question, and I'm more than happy to give you details on it. But I would
Perfect.
like to encourage you all to ask very direct questions. Nothing is off bar here.
Perfect, Juana. So maybe let's sort of walk through getting to the PhD, and then we'll talk a bit about your time in the PhD program, and we should get into some what are the plans afterwards, right? So talk to me about being at the University of Chicago, a PhD being on your radar. Like, what are the things you did to sort of feed that interest? And maybe you can talk, our guests are all maybe contemplating MIT for a PhD. Talk to us a bit about what you think made you competitive for a place like MIT.
Yeah. So this is a really great question. I really like this question because it's really easy for you all to see me now and be like, oh my God, she is like at MIT and she's just like super like confident and like high energy graduate students who's like clearly being wildly successful. And that's not, I think, the vibe I gave off when I was younger in undergrad. So I went through the Chicago public school system, which is sort of like not a great school system. It was like reasonable. But what happened is most of the schools I went to were under resourced. And so I did really well in school. And that was in part because I was never challenged to do well. And then suddenly I'm coming to the University of Chicago as a first year student, and I feel like I'm like way behind my peers. It's not that I'm not smart. It's like I'm not used to like how do I engage in office hours or what are expectations from my professors. And then like my parents couldn't advise me on that, and my sister only had a year of experience ahead of me, so there wasn't a lot to do there. And I had this sort of vague notion. I think research might be interesting, and so I got slotted into this advanced biology course, so sort of a crash course into research. And we got to do in-person lab courses, which I thought were super fun. I'm like, oh my God, I love breaking things productively. I would like to do more of this. And because of this, or because of that class, two things happened. One, I realized a lot of other people had way more research experience with me at that time. There's like people who like did research in high school, which is like wild. How do you do that? But also like I sort of felt like they were more prepared to like handle the college level component of it. And I got really lucky that my one of the professors who sort of heads that class said, I will help you find research labs if you're interested in doing research. And ultimately, despite knowing what my midterm grades were in her genetics class, she is the person who offered me a 10-week internship in her lab. And nothing worked the first like 3 weeks I was there. Like everything, like nothing was working. My experiments were just sort of all over the place, but I was having a lot of fun. And I had a really good graduate student mentor. His name was Matt Hope. And he was like wildly patient with me. And the thing that my professor liked the most about me was she didn't really care that my stuff wasn't working. She really liked the fact that despite things not working, I was still really excited about trying again. And so it's like that sort of enthusiasm, like wanting to do the work because science mostly doesn't work, is harder to teach in students. Like I could eventually get better at the techniques, but it's much harder to get better at being resilient or like genuinely enjoying the topic I was studying. And so because of that, 3 weeks into my internship, despite nothing having worked, she offered me a full-time job with her lab. And I'm like, great, this is super exciting. And so I worked there for 10 weeks. And somewhere in the middle of that, I realized that the graduate students were being paid to be there, which is wild. I didn't know there was like a job you could do, or that you could be paid to go to school. So it wasn't just like they're getting money to like spend on their own things. Their tuition's also being paid for. And I'm like, oh, that makes it super accessible. And if I have to do a job for 40 hours a week, then this is the job I would like to do. So I made this like bold declaration to my advisor. And I'm like, I want to go to graduate school. And like the first summer after my first year of undergrad. And she sort of giggled at it. And she's like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. And then we never talked about it. Um, and one of the things I think she did that was super well done is she encouraged me to do things that would make me very competitive without telling me that was the reason she was making me do this. It's like, hey, there's these fellowships you can apply for because we're not automatically paid as undergrads. It's like, you should apply for one. And like, she helped me write like a research proposal and like an abstract. And then she helped me prepare my presentation. And then once I got my fellowship, she's like, hey, you should really spend some of that money to go to conferences. And here are some ones I think you should go to so you can get more practice presenting. Or like, hey, or then I would be like, there's a symposium. She's like, yes, you should do the symposium at your local university. This is perfectly fine. And over time, the sort of kept escalating, right? So I was a student who did one sort of long-term research experience over many years. That's not to say that's the only way to successfully apply, but that meant by the time I got to applications, I had 3 years of experience under me. And I got experience of like talking and discussing my work, both in like written formats, but also presentations. I was starting to write a paper. We didn't actually end up publishing the paper, but we were thinking about writing a paper. And generally I got like a holistic view of like, here's what research feels like. And so that I think put me on really good footing when I was coming up to applications. But the actual process of applying, I think, is a very difficult one to be in. Um, so from my perspective, I am a undergrad in one lab at a university, and I have friends who are also doing research, but I don't really have like a concept of like where do I fall relative to my peers? And
Right.
I was still sort of stuck in this mentality. I'm like, oh, I'm this public school kid who's like way behind everybody else. I'm clearly not qualified enough. I cannot do this. And so my one day my advisor traps me in a room. I'm like doing dissections. I cannot physically move. It's like, let's have a live conversation. And I'm like, no. And so she starts asking, so what are you doing after graduation? I'm like, well, I figured I'd take like a gap year and maybe apply to graduate school afterwards. And she's like, why do you want to take a gap year? And I'm like, well, I have all these like really hard classes I have to take my senior year, and I'm scared that like if I'm doing interviews and applications, then my grades are going to drop. And also, I don't think I have enough research experience yet. Maybe if I got a paper out, then I would be a bit more competitive. And to her credit, she did let me discuss all of this with her, and she thought about it for a while. And I need to sort of pause right here, really emphasize I really respect this person. I appreciate how direct they are with me, and I have a lot of trust with them, right? I believe that they have my best interest in heart. And so if they're telling me things, they're not doing it because they want bad things to happen. They're doing it because they think this is the best way forward. And so she listens, and she's like, great. I think those are all really dumb reasons not to apply to graduate school. And I'm like, no, oh, I'm in trouble. And she says, you think your grades matter, but they don't matter as much as you think they do. And they won't see your transcripts of your last year as you're applying. So if you think those classes are hard, it's actually to your benefit to apply now. And you, as long as you don't fail your classes, they're not going to rescind your offer. They don't care how you do in quantum mechanics. And you think you don't have enough research experience, but like, I think you're ready now. And so she's like, think about it. We can talk about it. And so what was our plan? The plan was that I would pretend to apply to graduate school that year. And I would do everything I needed to do to make the sort of application deadlines. But if at any point I panicked or it was too much or something would go wrong, we could just pause. I could take the gap year and then we would be okay. But what she didn't tell me is that every time I panicked or got really stressed out, she would calm me down and reassure me that we were still doing okay. And so that was a really important part of this process, is that she had the really difficult job of being confident in me before I learned to be confident in myself. And so having that person who was sort of like pulling me along, and like she was very, very like she's like, send me your statement of objectives over Thanksgiving. And she's like, don't forget to like do these other things. And so I had someone who was very knowledgeable about this process helping me. And that imbued zero confidence in me while I was actually in that process. I was like, this isn't going to work. Like, what does she know about applying to graduate school? She like went there like 30 years ago. She's not actually that old, but it's like she's clearly out of touch. She has no idea what's going on. And what I failed to recognize is that as a professor at the University of Chicago, she also reads applications every year. She's on the admissions committee. She has a good idea of like what the pool of applicants looks like every year. And so when she's telling me, I think you can do this, she's speaking from a place of like very, very well informed. Um, when it came to actually picking my universities, that was scary. Because again, I'm like, I don't know how I feel. I'm like, I asked her, like, well, how do you think I should look for universities? And she says, Google best biology programs and then pick your favorites. And I'm like, that's a horrifying prospect. Why would you make me do that? And so I Googled it and I looked at things. And the one other piece of advice she gave me is like, don't apply to Harvard. Um, and she's like, from how I know you and your personality and what I know about that program, I do not think you would be happy there. And there's a reason why she was well positioned to make that particular statement. So I took that to heart. Not to say that's not a good fit for everybody, but that's just the advice she gave me. And so I picked up a couple programs, and when I asked her, this was part of our deal. She's like, you think applying to graduate school is going to be hard because you think you're going to have to apply to many programs, but you're only allowed to apply to 4. And and this is a very unique circumstance. I do not recommend doing that right now because graduate programs have become a lot more challenging to get into. And it's generally advisable to sort of spread your net a little bit more than that. So I'm on the very low end of programs. And she made this recommendation specifically because she felt I was a strong candidate. I didn't want to do that, but that's what we ended up doing. The other rule she gave me, I was not allowed to apply to the University of Chicago for my PhD. Um, because she thought I could learn more from going to different places and seeing how different sort of schools of thought work together. Um, and so I picked 4 places. It was MIT, Princeton, Yale, and Stanford. You'll notice that 3 of them are on the East Coast. And that's because I decided that if I had to die in a natural disaster, it was going to be a blizzard, which is currently going on outside. Because I don't want to die in an earthquake or on fire. There's no offense to the folks in California. I just have priorities here. But like that was a genuine reason. I'm like, I like seasons. I enjoy the snow. I don't like water restrictions. These are real reasons why I applied to some places. But Stanford, I'm like, well, if I'm going to a place in California, I will pick what I perceive to be the best university there, which was Stanford. And so I gave her my list of 4 schools, and then she's like, great. And I asked her, should I apply to like a safety school or something? And she's like, there's no safety schools in graduate school. You should only be applying to programs where you feel like if you got an offer, you would genuinely want to go there because you're going to be there for a very long time. I think right now that is a bit more loose because it is harder to get into programs and you sort of have to prioritize, do you want to get into a program now? Is that really valuable to you? Or do you want to wait for an opportunity to go to this other place for very specific reasons? And so I was like, cool. So these are the 4 I want. She's like, you do not need safety schools. And then she like gives me like the hardest question, which is, where do you really want to go? And like, this is a scary question because if you want something, it feels so much worse when you don't get it. And I was personally conflicted on I had thought about this and I didn't want to like recognize that answer for myself. And like realistically, like, well, if I could go to MIT, that would be nice. And I know that sounds kind of cliche, but like for me, it felt like a good place. And she's like, great. So what we're going to do, we're going to write all of your applications for MIT. And then a lot of the components are similar to other graduate school applications. And so I'm going to work with you to edit one school, your favorite, and then you're going to edit that for everybody else. And so that was our plan. And again, this process was hard. I panicked a lot. I had someone who was there to be supportive. And I remember it was like December on a Saturday, I went into lab to submit my applications because I had a little office space there. And I submitted them, and you'd think you would feel super relieved to be done with that process. And I think I was very relieved for like about 30 seconds before I realized, like, oh gosh, that's it. I got nothing else. There's no more influence I can put on this application right now. That's it. And that was like overwhelming. That was too much. I'm like, oh no. And so I had a habit of eating lunch on the floor outside of my lab because I was too tired to make it to like the tea room down the hall. And my PI was used to seeing me on the floor. This was apparently a common occurrence enough. And she frequently comes on the weekend to drop off cookies for the people who are working over the weekends. They have a little snack. And so I'm on the floor and I'm crying, but I'm not making any sounds. I'm just crying on the floor. And she comes out with her little box of cookies to put them on the shelf. And she sees me on the floor, which is not unusual. And then I look at her and she's like, oh no, what's wrong? And I'm like, what if nobody wants me? Which is like and then she's like trying to do damage control, right? And my PI was a wonderful human being. She's super intelligent. She knows so much about research, and she has no idea how to deal with crying children. And so she was trying to give me all these like objective views of like, well, your application is a lot stronger now. Your statement's in a much better place, and your transcripts are really good. And none of this was working. And then she's just like, oh, do you just want some cookies? Will this make you feel better? And so it cheered me up because she was so bad at cheering me up. I was like, okay, she also has things that she's not great at. This is good. And so what she told me was like, don't think about it. Something will come through. Like for right now, you sort of done what you can. Just enjoy the rest of your break. And biology isn't a direct to admissions type program. You get an offer for an in-person interview. A lot of them do them virtually now. and then you go in for an interview, and then afterwards they will give you your admissions offer. And so there's two rounds basically. Can you get an interview? And then can you actually get the offer? And so I turned in my applications on Saturday, and that Tuesday I got a phone call from someone in New Jersey, and I'm like, I don't know who this number, and I googled it, and then some like RNA guy in like Princeton. I'm like, oh, apparently they make the professors hand call the students, and like, do you want an interview? I'm like, yeah, that'd be great. And so that was kind of relieving. Okay, I got like immediate feedback. I am interested. I am worthy of something, and that I think that's the point where like my attitude started to change. Like, oh, maybe this might actually work out. And so oddly enough, MIT was the last person to reach out to my for an interview, not because they were like on the fence about me. They just take longer. But that process was stressful. Um, okay, but I'll sort of pause there
And,
and
and
just say,
so, so yeah,
yeah,
so that's a good place to pause. So I think you gave a good sense of sort of the emotional work involved in applying to PhD programs, right? You had an unconventional approach to selecting programs, right? And I think that was a good lesson for not everyone's process is going to be the same, right? And you should go with the process that works for you, or to the extent in your case that was sort of advised to you, right, by someone you trusted. So you're obviously here at MIT, right? So the other interviews weren't compelling enough. Talk to us briefly about like what about MIT attracted you that you said yes to the MIT offer.
yeah. So I think the interviews, being able to physically come into the universities, made a huge impact on the way I was sort of scaling everybody. So, for example, Princeton was in an area that was I thought would be difficult to live in. You kind of need a car to live there. I wasn't ready for a car. Boston, Cambridge is kind of like a city area, more similar to Chicago. Like you can walk around to get places. There's transit that kind of works. And for me, that was like really comfortable. Then there was the actual like people I was meeting there. And again, you're going to have different experiences when you talk to universities. You're going to have different priorities. When I went to go to Princeton, I'm not just railing on Princeton specifically, but they have like a very big drinking culture there, which is fine. But when you ask them what's your favorite thing about being a department, they're like, oh, we like it that our department pays for happy hours on Fridays, or we like it that our advisors don't care if we take long vacations. And they were all talking about other things that was not the work that they were doing. And they were like, yeah, as long as you don't break anything very expensive, you're gonna get your PhD in 5 years because like, there's no like we're just gonna do that for you. And I wanted to be more in the environment like, oh, someone's going to be pushing me to do good things. Um, the thing I liked about my department specifically is that one, the graduate students all knew each other, not just in their own year, but across years. There was this big culture of graduate students that are older advising younger graduate students. Um, the professors knew most of the students' names, even if they weren't directly working with them in any way. And so there's a big sort of first main basis culture in our department that I really liked. And it was one of the people where I genuinely saw students who were having fun. And you'd ask them about their work, they'd be really excited to talk about it. I saw students setting up collaborations kind of candidly in the wild, and that was kind of fun. And those were all like really positive experiences. And I'll sort of give you a different example. By contrast, I went to Stanford and I interviewed with their biochemistry home program. And I think I knew within like 30 minutes of being there, I did not want to go there because the things that I valued, they didn't really see there, right? Like I asked them, do you have a lot of chances to like mentor undergrads? And they're like, no, our building's too far away from campus. We don't really get undergrads. And I'm like, how do you feel about your classes? Like, well, the classes don't really matter. You just kind of do them and then move. And I'm like, okay, this isn't feeling like a place where I'm actually gonna get value for my training. And so there's a combination of different factors. I'll put like on the flip side, for example, when I went to Yale, they had done a wonderful job when it came to DEI work. They were arguing like we don't have enough Native American women faculty. Like that was their argument, not that we have no faculty of color in our departments. And it was very impactful in that sense. So I knew if I went to like Yale, for example, I wouldn't have had to do as much of the sort of like labor of like bringing in that DEI efforts. It would be more comfortable there. But on the flip side, Yale's program was huge. There was like hundreds of students coming in all at once. And I was like, I'm going to get lost in this. I need more personalized coaching. And this department cannot give that to me. So there's different values that I have. Those were all getting weighed in when I was making this decision. And ultimately, MIT ended up being the place I picked for a variety of different factors. And I think ultimately was a good place for me to be.
Nice. And so you're you personalize the choice, right? To find what or a place where you could be for multiple years. Um, you're now here on campus, so maybe let's start disaggregating those pieces. Talk to us a little bit about your research and why it's important and exciting. I hope it's exciting.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
it's great.
yeah.
So I made this comment earlier. I'm like, I'm going to grow up to be a biochemist. And I did really well in my biochemistry class here. And like we do rotations to find labs, so we don't go direct to labs. So that's an important thing to keep in mind. And I rotated with 2 biochemistry labs, and I was like, absolutely not. And the reason that I said that was not because the science wasn't interesting. It was actually really interesting projects. It's just the lab environment was not what was going to help me do my best work, right? One of the labs made me kind of uncomfortable because everybody in the lab was like really white. And I know that sounds kind of bad, but it made like, you could feel like the sort of othering that was happening in these like kind of quiet ways. And I'm like, this is not a good place. And the other lab had this thing where people were only work colleagues. They would come in, they would talk to each other about work things, and if they accidentally ended up in the lunchroom at the same time, there's just no talking between them. There's no personal ability in that. I'm like, I don't want to work there. And so, but the projects were interesting and they were exciting. And then COVID happened, and they canceled all of our rotations, and they forced us to wait until the summer, and we had to do them in this virtual hybrid model. And at that point, it became more important for me to get research that would give me good training that I could use anywhere as opposed to a particular subtopic that I really wanted to work on. And so there's clearly some things I just won't work on. Like I don't have an interest in cancer research. I don't like RNA or DNA work. That's just not things I'm interested in. But there's sort of a general range of things I'm willing to engage. And so I reached out to the lab I joined because I'm like, you do a lot of computational work, and that's something I want to learn to do. And that's important to me. And they worked with fruit flies, which I already knew how to work with. Like, this feels like a good fit. And then my advisor's like, yeah, we do computational work. Maybe you can help us. I want to start this mouse project. And I'm like, absolutely not. I do not want to touch the mouse. And ultimately, we sort of had to strike a deal where it says I had to try the mouse project when I joined the lab. And I would get like sort of like backup project in case the mouse stuff doesn't work. But the reason I accepted this deal is because I would like to be a professor people one day when I get older. And so that lab had never worked with mice before. And so they were asking me to do a from the ground up type project. And I thought that was a really good training experience in this meta sense. Like, if I can establish a research program supervised in an existing lab, that's a really good learning experience for how that will feel like later on when I make my own lab. And at the time, my advisor, because COVID, he had nothing else to do. We worked really closely together, and he trained me how to do all the things, and we were like doing experiments together, and that was like a good sort of introduction. And so the lab studies how do you fold tissues into the right shape. And so we had these sort of basic principles. Can we apply them to more complicated systems like the ones in mice? And ultimately, I'm studying from like a basic biology perspective. Like I want to understand core fundamentals. But we study something called the neural tube. So it's like a flat sheet and it curls up into a tube. And that tube becomes your brain and your spinal cord. And if it fails to close, stays open, you start developing things like birth defects. One of the most common ones, spina bifida, occurs in 1 in every 1,000 babies born globally, which is really common. And there's other ones where like your head stays open, and that's just 100% lethal. So both of these are really bad. And where we are right now is we know that if you take folic acid, it helps. We have no idea why. And that's because we don't really understand how this process works normally. So we don't really understand what goes wrong. So my project was like, can you understand how does this part work? And that gives us a sort of understanding, a basis to then see like, how does that change when we have issues? Realistically, I spend most of my days taking pictures on the microscope, like, ooh, pretty pictures. Um, but this is sort of the project I've been working on. And it's been really exciting because everything I do, I have to do by myself. And so I'm learning lots of really interesting stuff, but it's also kind of frustrating, right? Because like there's no one I can go ask for help with. And my PI, who started off really enthusiastic on this project, started feeling a bit less enthusiastic about like reaching out to collaborators. He's like, what if we look dumb? And I'm like, we are dumb because we don't know what we're doing. I need to ask questions. And so there was sort of this increasing amount of friction between me and my advisor, right? So we had a good relationship when we started, but as my needs changed, our relationship also started to change. And that's just something you can't account for. And so ultimately, the point of a PhD is that you become a very like a high expert in your topic. You're the most informed about it. And that happened much faster than my advisor was expecting to happen. And I had to get really comfortable with like standing my ground and be like, I think this is important, and I think we should do these things based on what I'm like, or based on like what I'm seeing. And there's all these sort of other kind of interesting dynamics about like, oh yeah, I'm like your only person of color in the lab, and like there was issues of like some of my lab mates were uncomfortable with this. They sort of like saw me as like the loud, aggressive brown person in the lab. I'm like, no, I have volume, but I'm just being assertive, and that's different. And so I think the project has been really helpful in learning a lot of different skills between like interpersonal relationships to like techniques. And also like it has had a sort of a good influence on the type of work I'm trying to do moving forward.
Perfect. So we heard quite a bit about, navigating the research space, finding a topic almost by accident that you've now, I assume, come to love. I can hear the passion in it because you're the expert. Um, I often say that one of the greatest learnings you have in graduate school is learning more about yourself. What have you learned about yourself through this
Uh,
process in
I
graduate?
love this question. This is such a good question, and I think it really gets to like what my philosophy of like this whole point, like this whole process was. Right, this is a training program, and the point is to learn things, and that's both about yourself, about the things that you can do, or the things that you want to do. And so I came in with this vision. I would like to be professor people. And part of that evaluation, like, okay, if this is where I want to go, what does that mean for me? Like, what does that look like? Um, Really young professors spend a lot of time in the lab doing work. And I'm like, I like doing work in the lab. I like breaking things. This is what I know. But you look at older professors, they've stepped away from the bench. They now have to delegate, and they're spending a lot more time writing grants, for example, giving presentations, giving talks. And when I started my PhD program, I'm like, oh, I'm bad at writing. I'm not a good writer. And that was like the wrong mindset to be in. And because like a lot of everything else in my life, if I want to be good at something, I have to try to improve on it. And I have to make an active effort on that. And so it's bad to say I'm bad at writing, because that's sort of very concrete. This is just a fact about me. And the better mindset I ended up developing was like, I need to work on my writing skills to get it to somewhere where I want it to be. I'm not a scientist who occasionally has to stop doing science to write something. I am a scientist and I am also a writer. And I need to work on both of those skills. And so I looked for opportunities to improve a skill that I thought was necessary. And if in that process I was like, wow, I really hate this, then maybe that's a good reason to maybe reevaluate, is this a job career that I want to do? And so I took like a writing, several like writing classes. I got engaged. I read books about like what does writing look like. Um, and I decided that I'm like, how do I build better writing habits? And can I give myself a project that will give me a good experience about whether or not this is something I want to do? So even though I didn't need to apply for funding, I asked my advisor, and I kind of sort of pushed him into it, to let me write a grant for the NIH as a fellowship. And because I'm like, I at some point need to get good at begging the government for money, because that's sort of what my job is going to be. And I can learn more about the bureaucracy and see, can I actually handle a writing project of this size? And I took the grant writing certification program that MIT now offers. And this was like a really good learning experience, right? And I'm like, oh, yes, when I actually have a better sense of how this process works, I can enjoy this process. I like making time to write. This is good, right? I feel more confident because I am building up this skill. And so a lot of my PhD has been this. It's not just been here is what I am doing. I'm only focused on my research. That's the only thing that matters. There's been a lot of pause, reflect. What do I want to get better at? And how do I try to move forward? What aspect of what I'm doing am I enjoying? And what careers are offered to me that let me do it, right? So I did some TAing because my program requires that. And I asked my professor if he would let me spend more time TAing than researching. And he said, that's fine. And I like teaching. It's something I enjoy. I took the teaching certification program. Like, oh, this is really fun. I would like to do more of this. So we check off professor. But also like I had challenges with like other people in my departments, other people in my lab. And I'm like, how do I deal with conflict? Can I manage these interpersonal relationships? Like, where are my limits? How do I set boundaries? How do I improve my ability to communicate? And how do I try and see other people's perspectives and things, right? And so ultimately, my personal values have not changed. I still think like diversity is important. I think that we can make space for everybody. I think one of my responsibilities is not just to do really interesting research for me, right? I'm deeply privileged to be able to work in a field that I really like, that pays me a reasonable salary, right? And but you look around, like there's people who like have to do jobs just because they need money, and like it's just something that pays them. This is just a thing they have to do. And so I have to do research that then benefits the broader community because that's what I get to do with my privilege, right? I cannot just pick topics I think are cool. There has to be something that gives back a bit. And I think it's really important to be a mentor to other students because I had mentors who kind of like pulled me up, and I want to do that for other people. And so these values have not changed, but my skill set to be able to execute them has been growing. And that's been a very intentional process. And so I don't think I'm done yet. There's still things I'm trying to check off. But every year, it's a little bit moving forward, you get a little bit closer to that. And so I
And
encourage you, do not spend all of your time just doing research. There's all these other soft things that you need to work on alongside that.
perfect. And looking at the time, I have two questions to you. One you started already answering, but I'll just allow you to probably in a sort of rapid way go through it. That question for rapid fire is what are some resources at MIT that you leverage to get you where you are now?
Yes. So you need to read your emails because there's so many valuable opportunities just kind of pop up. And you don't have to do them all the time, but you should at least be aware of them, right? So there's a teaching certification program that I did, super helpful. The Writing Communication Center offers all these lovely workshops to teach you anything from how do you write a journal article, how do you write a review, how do you like get better explaining your science in a way that other people can find it enjoyable. The Career and Professional Development Office will work with you very personally. I have like a really good relationship with Alex, and she knows all of the things that I'm thinking about, and she can advise me really. Was like, and when it's like, hey, I heard about this opportunity for you. Would you be interested in this? Right. So building those relationships, super helpful. MIT Health, we love therapy because I've had some really bad times in graduate school, and that's normal. But they've also taught me skills for like how do you deal with that. And then of course the Office of Graduate Education and the student organizations that are sort of more culturally based, they offer really nice support networks for like me as like a person, right? I am a person who exists and just sometimes have to like vent at other people. And having that personal relationship away from my department, away from my science, has been really helpful for me. Okay.
Perfect. And then my final question, and this is where I tell our guests, feel free to put any questions you have for Juana in the Q&A function, and we'll get to them as soon as she answers this final question from me. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give to an undergraduate who's considering applying to PhD programs at MIT?
Yeah. So nobody thinks they're ready to apply to graduate school. I have seen lots of students who feel like they need to kick the can a little bit further down and maybe try a couple things. And you know, there are reasons why one could delay this, right? Maybe you're in your senior year, like I really don't have any research experience. It takes some maybe it takes some time to like actually get some more research experience. That's fine. But eventually you must take this plunge. And there are resources available if you need help financially to afford to apply, because there is money involved. Um, and building up that network of people who can help sort of motivate you and sort of reaffirm that you are capable and you are really good. When you're having those self doubts, if you're trying to explain why you are competent, is really important. Um, it's okay if it takes more than one try to get into graduate school. There's no rush to get there, in the sense that nobody expects you to apply straight out of undergrad to go to graduate school. That's what worked out for me. That was my path. That's not the path for everybody. And I'd encourage you to talk to graduate students that you know what was your experience. There's lots of resources. There's lots of people who know about this who can give you their 2 cents. I am but one of those people. And yeah, it is okay if you're a bit uncomfortable with the process. And it's important to have those people who can be around you to be supportive and can sort of give you that advice and like try and help you build up that skill set and that confidence to do well in graduate school.
Perfect. And this is where we stop and let's take some questions. I don't see any questions yet, so we'll give folks a couple minutes to answer questions, to ask some questions. Maybe while we wait, Juana, what brings you joy?
What brings me joy? Okay, I am a highly food motivated organism. You can Google MIT News and my name, and they wrote an article about how much I like food. This is not a joke. It's 100% real. Um, okay, so much so that this was really important for me when I came here because food is really important in my culture, and there's no good Mexican food in the state of Massachusetts. And so my parents had to teach me how to cook so that I would feel better and have that sort of like I wouldn't feel as homesick. Um, it's something I use to build relationships with other people. I'm also a very notorious baker now. Denzil, let me know when you're in the office because I have 70 chocolate covered strawberries that I made last night that now need to find homes. Um, this brings me joy is being
Right.
able to share the little sweet treats with other people.
Nice.
If any of you are in the Massachusetts area, you can also have a chocolate covered strawberry. Just let me know.
Perfect. And I see we have a question, Juana. So we know the theme here is Juana loves food. So anything about food, that's Juana. So the question we have is, after coming to MIT, what was the biggest challenge, personal or research based, you had to overcome and how?
Okay, so I'm kind of unusual as a graduate student because my project just kind of worked. I made this whole thing about like science doesn't work all the time, and my project has been like wildly successful in ways I was not anticipating. Um, and in some ways, this was the only good thing that was going for me for a while, right? I would have left my lab a lot earlier if it had not been for how successful my project was. And this is sort of on the other flip side, one of the hardest things I had to deal with as a PhD student was the early version of um, and it's a very complicated multifactorial thing. Um, it was I was doing a research project that was scientifically separate from what the rest of my lab was doing. So there's intellectual separation. I'm working with mice, they're working with fruit flies, there's some overlap, but not a ton. And the people in my lab weren't that interested in trying to learn this new thing with me. So we still had lab meetings, but they were sort of disconnected from what I was saying. There was this physical isolation. COVID was a thing. There were spacing restrictions. And so the main lab space was full. And so I got put into a side room away from everybody else. There's a physical isolation from everybody else. And that was great during COVID because I could come in whenever I wanted, but also impacted my integration into the group. So now we have a intellectual, physical isolation. And then there was this like identity isolation because my lab was very uniform in a lot of things. they were all used to being around people who are very much like them, and they were not used to some of the things I brought. And so I'd get these like, I didn't know that why I felt weird about this, and I had to learn this afterwards. What's a microaggression? But like they're like, why does your food smell so much? Or like, what do you mean your family doesn't celebrate this holiday? Right? Or like they looked at me weird the first time they heard me speaking in a different language. And so I don't think they were doing this intentionally. I think it was that they genuinely had not spent a lot of time interacting with other groups of people. And this we add the fact that both my PhD advisor and my lab were all very non-confrontational, to the point where like even basic things like, hey, you left the lab bench dirty, could you clean it up before you leave so that other people can eat? Like this was not something people were comfortable talking about. And so when you get to these bigger issues of like, hey, I'm being treated in a way that like doesn't feel okay, like the lab was not prepared to handle that. And it became an issue because I would be like, hey, people are like saying these weird things and I'm not enjoying that. And my advisor's suggestion would be like, well, like maybe stop talking about those things. Or I'd say, hey, like they're doing these things and I don't think it's okay. And he's like, I'll go talk to them. And he'd tell them, maybe you should just like stop talking to her. Or he'd be like, eventually I started complaining too much or like bringing up too many issues. Like maybe you should consider stop rocking the boats. And we had to like physically bring in outside moderators to be like, no, no, some of these issues are like real issues that should not be allowed. And we went through this whole like group therapy phase for a while. And ultimately some of those relationships just like never panned out. And the solution was that people graduated and there was turnover. But that's like a really hard time where I'm like having this existential crisis. I'm like, oh my God, do I belong here? Like, am I just going crazy? Is it just me? Because there was nobody else in the lab who had like had that same experience. And now my lab was great. The people in my lab were like really nice people. And that's sort of like self-selected, right? Like I am a strong presence in my lab. Other people who are like me or like who share my values were coming into the lab. I still have friction with my advisor over this. And it's sort of an issue that will resolve itself because I am graduating. And so this sort of being myself and like holding on to my values was a difficult part of my PhD. Again, I had all these other cute little resources around me to like, okay, when my lab is being too much, I can take a step back, hang out with these other people, get that support. And my science is working, and I am not going to let these people take that away from me, right? So I feel like both of those things have been not working. I would have just switched labs and gone to do something else, right? That project was not important enough for me to like devastate myself to that extent, right? It's not just about getting a PhD. It's getting a PhD and still feeling like I'm a functional human being who can go on to be successful. And so there's balances to be had here. I fully respect if other people are just like not comfortable with those situations, do not want to deal with them. But for me, that was sort of like that was a battle I put my foot down on because I want to be successful. Okay, that was a good question. I appreciate
Perfect.
it.
Yeah. Next question. So you talked about wanting to go on to becoming a faculty member. What does that look like for someone who is graduating in the next few months? Like, what's the next steps?
Yeah, so I started applying for jobs back in the fall, part of the summer. And it's complicated right now because there's no money and the US government's being weird. And so I got a lot of advice that I should look for people who either have private funding or who are abroad that have different rules.
And when you say you applied for jobs, you applied to postdocs?
Yeah, I initially thought I was going to apply for what are called fellows programs. So instead of doing a postdoc where you work alongside a faculty member, you do some work for them, but also do your own thing. Fellows positions say we will give you some money to just start your own lab, and you will have to apply for money to like hire more people, but we're going to give you 4 years to just sort of start your research program, and this is supposed to give you a leg up when you go to apply for faculty jobs. This ended up, I decided to not do that because I wasn't comfortable fighting for grants and like the sort of really different funding situation that we're in right now. And so now I'm applying for postdocs, or I was applying for postdocs. And I applied to a couple places abroad because I worked in the UK for part of my PhD. And I ended up, I like have all but a former offer from a place here in the US. The Howard Hughes Medical Institute, which is like a really big sort of private biology funding group. They also have their own research campus. And they're working on like sort of developmental mice things that build off of what I was working on. And so this checks off a couple really fun boxes for me. It is a project that I'm interested in doing. The money is privately funded. And so I don't have to worry about accidentally being fired a year from now because someone's grants didn't go through, or like desperately trying to get my own fellowships. But also, I have a partner, and they work in the Virginia area. And so that place just happens to be conveniently nearby, which was a different factor that I was sort of like, it's okay if I'm away from my postdoc, but if I come back for the U, all these things. And so this is this ended up working out, I think, well into my favor. But I fully recognize it's kind of tricky right now, trying to figure out what position is next. Um, yeah.
Perfect. And looking at the time, that brings us to the end of today's session. So I want to thank our guests for joining us. And in a couple of weeks, we should have this interview up on our website for you to reference going forward. Next month, in the month of March, I believe we have a guest coming to join us from mechanical engineering. And I'd encourage our guests, despite the sort of disciplinary background of our guests, it's always good to hear stories about how folks have persisted through their PhD programs as a good sense of understanding. There may be little snippets from Juana's life or from Jadal's life that you're going to hear that are going to be relevant to you. And those are the things you sort of squirrel away to help benefit your process, right? So thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Juana, for joining us. I hope you don't eat all the strawberries, given that you're trapped inside. And for folks, if you want, feel free to reach out to us, graddiversity@mit.edu. And if we don't have the resources within our office, we'll connect you with students and or other campus offices that have those resources. Thank you all. See you next month. And thank you, Juana. Take care.
Bye.